The Montana sunset bled crimson across the town square as Eliza Whitmore clutched her 6-month-old son tighter, her bare feet bleeding on the splintered auction platform. Below her, men she'd once served coffee to now bid on her body, her labor, her future, payment for debts signed in her dead husband's drunken hand. The banker's gavel rose. Then hoofbeats shattered the moment. A dust-covered stranger dismounted with the stillness of a man who'd killed before, dropped a leather pouch heavy with gold, and said just 4 words that changed everything. I'll take them both. If you're watching from Nashville, Sao Paulo, Manila, or anywhere between, drop your city in the comments below. Let's see how far Eliza's story travels. And if this hook grabbed you, hit that like button and settle in, because what happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. The crowd parted like water around a stone as the stranger walked toward the platform. Eliza's vision swam. Hunger, shame, and 3 sleepless nights blurred the edges of reality. She registered only fragments: the man's height, the way his worn duster hung heavy with trail dust, eyes the color of winter sky beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "You can't just—" The banker sputtered, his jowls quivering with indignation. The stranger didn't look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on Eliza as he counted out coins with practiced precision, each one clinking against the auction block's edge like a hammer striking iron. "That covers the principal debt, the interest, and whatever additional fees you've manufactured in the past week. I expect a receipt." The banker's mouth worked soundlessly. Around them, the crowd murmured, confusion, disappointment, curiosity threading through the gathering dusk. Eliza felt her knees threatening to buckle. Her son, Thomas, whimpered against her chest, his tiny fist tangled in her threadbare shawl. "Ma'am." The stranger's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Quiet, steady. "You're going to need to come down from there." She looked into his face for the first time. Hard lines carved by wind and sun, a jaw that looked like it had been broken and healed crooked, a scar threading white through his left eyebrow. But his eyes? There was something in them that wasn't cruelty. Wasn't hunger. She couldn't name it, but it loosened something in her chest just enough to breathe. I can't." Her voice cracked. She hadn't spoken above a whisper in days. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something darker, gunpowder maybe, or old smoke. "I'm not going to hurt you, neither of you, but we need to get off this street before someone gets ideas about renegotiating." Thomas chose that moment to wail, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the evening air. The stranger's expression shifted, something almost like pain flickering across his features before his face went smooth again. "The child needs feeding," Eliza whispered. There hasn't been—" "I know." He held up one hand, palm out, the universal gesture of peace. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen keeps a clean kitchen. We'll get you both fed, get you warm, and then we'll talk. That acceptable?" Eliza nodded because she had no other choice, because her son was crying, because the alternative was climbing back onto that block tomorrow when this stranger's gold ran out. She let him guide her down the steps, his hand steadying her elbow with a gentleness that felt foreign after weeks of rough handling. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, like scavengers denied a kill. She felt their eyes tracking her progress down the main street, felt the weight of their judgment and speculation. The stranger walked beside her, not touching, but close enough that his presence formed a barrier between her and the stairs. Mrs. Chen's boarding house sat at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The proprietor, a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, took one look at Eliza and Thomas before turning her sharp gaze on the stranger. Caleb Mercer. Not a question, a statement weighted with history. "Ma'am." He removed his hat, and Eliza noticed for the first time that his dark hair fell past his collar, tied back with a leather cord. "Need a room for the night, 2 beds, and whatever food you can spare." Mrs. Chen's eyes narrowed. "You bring trouble to my door?" "No, ma'am. Brought someone who needs shelter. That's still something you provide?" A long moment passed. Then Mrs. Chen stepped aside. "Upstairs, 2nd door. Water's heating. I'll send food up in 20 minutes. She looked at Eliza, and her expression softened fractionally. "Child looks hungry. I've got goat's milk that's fresh." Eliza's eyes burned. Thank you. The room was small but clean, two narrow beds separated by a washstand, a single window overlooking the darkening prairie. Caleb set his saddlebags in the corner and moved immediately back toward the door. Where are you going? The question escaped before Eliza could stop it, and she hated the fear in her own voice. He paused with his hand on the door frame. Giving you privacy. I'll be downstairs. Lock this behind me. Wait. She shifted Thomas to her other hip, the baby's crying fading to exhausted hiccups. I don't understand what's happening. Why you... Caleb turned back, and in the dim light from the single lamp, his face looked older, tired. Your husband, James Whitmore. I knew him, long time ago. Eliza's breath caught. You knew James? Rode together for a while. Before he came to Montana. Before he... Caleb's jaw tightened. Before he decided gambling was easier than ranching. He never mentioned you? No. Expect he wouldn't have. Something like regret crossed his features. Man I knew back then, he had potential. Good with horses, good with his hands, but he had demons, and I should have done more. Should have seen it coming. Seen what coming? The drinking, the cards, the way he'd bet everything on a bad hand because he thought his luck was about to turn. Caleb's voice went flat, factual. I heard about what happened, heard he'd died owing money, heard his widow was left holding the debt. Eliza felt something hard and sharp lodge in her throat. You came because you felt guilty. I came because James once pulled me out of a canyon when my horse went lame and I was half dead from a bullet wound. He could have left me, could have taken my gear and my horse and saved himself a week's trouble. But he didn't. Caleb met her eyes. So no, ma'am. I didn't come out of guilt. I came to pay a debt. Thomas whimpered, drawing both their attention. Caleb's expression shifted again, that same fleeting pain Eliza had noticed earlier. How old? He asked quietly. 6 months, almost 7. He nodded slowly. Boy needs his mother fed. I'll send Mrs. Chen up with that milk. He stepped into the hallway, then paused. Lock the door, Mrs. Whitmore, and try to sleep. We've got a long ride ahead of us. Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the stairs. Eliza stood frozen for a long moment before her shaking hands managed to turn the lock. She sank onto the nearest bed, Thomas still clutched against her chest, and finally, let herself cry. The food came as promised. Hot stew thick with vegetables and meat, fresh bread still warm from the oven, goat's milk in a clean bottle with a cloth nipple Mrs. Chen had fashioned from boiled cotton. Eliza ate mechanically, each bite feeling like swallowing stones, while Thomas nursed the milk with desperate efficiency. She should feel relieved, grateful. Instead, she felt hollowed out, like something essential had been carved from her chest and left a cavity that echoed with every breath. James was dead, had been dead for 3 weeks, and she'd barely had time to mourn before the creditors descended. The man she'd married at 19, the father of her child, reduced to a list of debts and broken promises. And now this stranger, this Caleb Mercer, had appeared like something from a fever dream, paying off debts that weren't his, claiming obligations to a dead man's memory. She didn't trust it, couldn't trust it. Men didn't help women without expecting something in return. That was a truth she'd learned long before James had drunk himself into an early grave. Thomas fell asleep in her arms, milk-drunk and finally quiet. Eliza cleaned him with water from the washstand, marveling at how much weight he'd lost, how his ribs showed through skin that had once been plump and healthy. Guilt crashed over her, wave after wave of it. She'd failed him, failed to protect him from his father's choices, failed to feed him properly, failed to keep them both safe. She laid him carefully in one of the beds, building a barrier of rolled blankets to keep him from rolling off the edge. Then she moved to the window, looking out at the vast darkness of the prairie beyond the town's edge. Somewhere out there was Caleb Mercer's ranch. The high country, he'd called it, remote, isolated. She'd be completely dependent on him, completely at his mercy. The thought made her skin crawl even as exhaustion pulled at her bones. But what choice did she have? Return to town and watch them auction her off again? Try to make it alone with an infant in a territory that swallowed strong men whole? At least with Caleb, she had, what? A debt owed to a dead man, A stranger's word that he wouldn't hurt her. It was thin comfort, but it was all she had. A knock at the door made her jump. "Mrs. Whitmore? It's Mrs. Chen." Eliza unlocked the door to find the proprietor holding an armload of fabric. "Thought you might need these. Not much, but they're clean and they'll keep you warmer than what you're wearing." 2 dresses, both well worn but mended with careful stitches. A woolen shawl. A pair of boots that looked only slightly too large. Eliza's eyes burned again. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." Mrs. Chen set the clothes on the empty bed. "But I will tell you this. Caleb Mercer is a hard man. Seen a lot. Done things that would make lesser men crumble. But he's not cruel. Not like some." Her dark eyes fixed on Eliza with uncomfortable intensity. "You could do worse than accepting his help. Have done worse, I'm guessing." Eliza's hands twisted in her skirt. "You know him well?" "Well enough. He comes through twice a year for supplies. Keeps to himself mostly. But I saw him once pull a drunk off a woman in the street. Didn't kill the man, though he could have. Just made it clear that kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated." Mrs. Chen moved toward the door. "He's downstairs now, sleeping in a chair by the fire rather than taking the other bed up here. That tell you something?" After Mrs. Chen left, Eliza changed into one of the dresses. Rough cotton, but clean and whole. She checked on Thomas, who slept with the boneless abandon of infancy, then lay down on the other bed without undressing fully. Sleep came in fractured pieces, broken by Thomas's stirring and her own spiraling thoughts. Dawn came cold and gray. Eliza woke to find Thomas awake but quiet, his wide eyes tracking the unfamiliar ceiling. She nursed him. Her milk had come back slightly with proper food and rest, and dressed him in the least threadbare of his few garments. Caleb was waiting in the boarding house kitchen, 2 horses saddled and ready in the street beyond. He'd shaved, she noticed, and his dark hair was still damp from washing. It made him look younger, though the hard edges of his face remained unchanged. "Morning," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "Mrs. Chen packed food for the journey. 3 days' worth, if we're careful." 3 days? Eliza's stomach dropped. "Your ranch is 3 days from here?" "In good weather. Could be 4 if we hit storms." He poured coffee from a tin pot, handed her a cup without asking if she wanted it. "High country, good grazing, plenty of water, but not close to anything. That a problem?" Everything about this was a problem, but Eliza wrapped her hands around the coffee's warmth and said, "No, it's not a problem." His eyes, gray in the morning light, studied her face. "You're a terrible liar, Mrs. Whitmore." "I'm alive. My son is alive. That's more than I could say 2 days ago." She sipped the coffee, bitter and strong. "When do we leave?" "Soon as you're ready." Ready, as if she could ever be ready for this, riding into the wilderness with a stranger, trusting him with her life and her child's life because she had no other options. But Eliza had learned something in the weeks since James's death. Survival didn't require readiness. It only required the will to keep breathing through whatever came next. Mrs. Chen appeared with a canvas pack. "Food, clean cloths for the baby, herbs for fever, in case." She pressed the pack into Eliza's hands. "And this." A small knife, sharp and well-maintained in a leather sheath. "Keep it close." Eliza met the older woman's eyes and understood. Not for cooking, for protection. Against wild animals, against men, against whatever might come in the dark spaces between towns and civilization. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb had rigged a sling across his chest, leather and canvas, surprisingly well crafted. "For the child," he said, not quite meeting Eliza's eyes. "Leaves your hands free for riding. He'll stay warmer against body heat." The care in that gesture, the thought behind it, made Eliza's throat tighten. She transferred Thomas into the sling, settling him against Caleb's broad chest. The baby looked impossibly small against the man's frame, but Thomas seemed content, his tiny fist gripping Caleb's shirt. "He trusts you," Eliza said, surprised. "Children and horses, they know things adults forget." Caleb adjusted the sling with careful hands. "Ready?" The ride began in silence. Eliza sat astride her horse, a sturdy mare with kind eyes, and tried not to think about how long it had been since she'd ridden, how her body ached from the previous day's ordeal. The town fell away behind them, and with it the last vestiges of civilization. The prairie stretched endless in every direction, broken only by distant ridges and the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking a water source. The sky arced overhead, impossibly vast, the kind of sky that made a person feel both infinite and insignificant. They rode steadily north, stopping only to water the horses and let Eliza nurse Thomas. Caleb kept a careful distance during these breaks, turning his back without being asked, giving her privacy she hadn't expected. By midday, the flatlands began to give way to rolling hills. By afternoon, those hills had grown into foothills, and ahead Eliza could see mountains rising like broken teeth against the horizon. "That's where we're headed," Caleb said, the first words he'd spoken since morning. "High valley between those two peaks, good shelter from winter storms. Creek runs year-round." "Sounds isolated." "It is." No apology in his tone. "Nearest neighbor is 2 days' ride. Nearest town is what we just left. You'll be alone most of the time, except for me and whatever hands I hire for roundup." Eliza absorbed this. Alone. Isolated. Dependent entirely on this man's word and whatever mercy he chose to show. "Why ranching?" she asked, more to break the silence than from real curiosity. "Why not something else? Something easier?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Tried something else? Didn't take. Ranching is honest work. Animals don't lie. Weather doesn't pretend to be something it's not. You work hard, you might make it. You don't, you die. Simple. And if I can't work hard enough? If I'm not useful enough to justify keeping around?" He turned in his saddle to look at her fully. "You think I'd turn you out? Send you back? I think men's promises are worth exactly as much as the situation allows. When things get hard, when I become more burden than help, I think your sense of obligation to a dead man might not seem as binding as it does right now." Something shifted in his expression, anger, maybe, or respect. "Fair enough. You don't know me. Got no reason to trust me. But I'll tell you this, and you can believe it or not. I don't go back on my word. Ever. I said I'd clear your debt, and I did. Didn't say anything about you earning your keep or proving your worth. You and the child need shelter. You've got it. Simple as that." "Nothing's that simple." "No," Caleb agreed quietly. "I suppose it's not." They camped that night in a shallow ravine sheltered from the wind. Caleb built a fire with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and sure. He heated water for Thomas's milk, cooked salt pork and beans over the flames, and built up the fire high before settling on the opposite side from where Eliza sat with the baby. "You should sleep," he said, his face shadowed by firelight. "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too." "I'm used to it." "You're not." He pulled his rifle across his lap, checked the load with hands that moved too fast to track. "Besides, there's wolves up here. Maybe worse. Better if one of us stays alert." Eliza wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. She wrapped herself and Thomas in the blankets Caleb had provided, lay down with her back to the fire's warmth, and closed her eyes. Sleep came in fragments again, broken by Thomas's stirring and the sounds of the night. Wind through grass, horses shifting, the crack and pop of the fire. Once she woke to find Caleb standing at the ravine's edge, his silhouette black against the starlit sky, rifle in hand. He stood so still he could have been carved from stone, watching the darkness with the patience of a man who'd spent years learning to see what others missed. Morning came with frost on the ground and their breath visible in the air. Caleb had coffee ready, along with the last of Mrs. Chen's bread. "Long day ahead," he said, handing Eliza a tin cup. "We'll make the foothills by dark if we push." They rode through country that grew progressively wilder. Scrub pine and juniper replacing prairie grass, rocks rising from the earth like broken bones. The air thinned, making Eliza's lungs work harder. Thomas fussed periodically, unsettled by the altitude or the constant motion, but Caleb seemed to have endless patience, adjusting his pace to give the baby time to settle. Late afternoon brought the first real test, a stream swollen from mountain runoff, running too fast and too deep to ford safely. Caleb studied the water with a frown. "Going to have to go upstream, find a narrower crossing." They followed the stream for nearly an hour before finding a spot where fallen trees created a natural bridge. Caleb dismounted, tested the logs with his weight, then looked back at Eliza. "I'll take the horses across one at a time. You and Thomas wait here." "What if the logs give way?" "Then I get wet." He untied his saddlebags, carried them across the logs with the casual balance of a man who'd done this before. Then he came back for the horses. Eliza watched him lead her mare across first, murmuring low words she couldn't hear, one hand on the horse's neck to keep her calm. The mare's hooves slipped once on the wet bark, and Eliza's heart stopped, but Caleb steadied her with nothing but his voice and his presence. His own horse followed more easily, trusting its rider's judgment even as water rushed just inches below the makeshift bridge. When both horses stood safely on the far bank, Caleb came back for Eliza and Thomas. "Give me the baby," he said, holding out his arms. Every instinct screamed at Eliza to refuse. But Thomas was exhausted, and the crossing looked treacherous even without an infant in her arms. She transferred her son into Caleb's keeping, watched the man settle Thomas against his chest with the same careful precision he'd shown that morning. "Now you," Caleb said, "take my hand. Don't look at the water." His hand was warm, calloused, the grip firm without being tight. Eliza stepped onto the logs and felt them shift beneath her weight, her breath hitched. "Eyes on me," Caleb said, his voice cutting through her panic. "Not the water, just me. One step at a time." She focused on his face, the gray eyes, the scar through his eyebrow, the set of his jaw. Focused on the pressure of his hand in hers, the way he moved backward across the logs without ever looking down, trusting his feet to find purchase. Step by step, they crossed, and when Eliza's boots hit solid ground on the far side, her knees nearly buckled. "You did good," Caleb said quietly, already transferring Thomas back to her arms. "Real good." They made camp as darkness fell, in a stand of pines that broke the wind. Caleb shot a rabbit, skinned and cooked it, while Eliza fed Thomas and tried to stop shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. "One more day," Caleb said as they ate. "Maybe less if we make good time." "And then what?" The question came out sharper than Eliza intended. "We get to your ranch and then what? What exactly do you expect from me?" He was quiet for a long moment, firelight playing across his features. "Expect you to heal. Expect Thomas to grow. Beyond that?" He shrugged. "Haven't thought that far." "You brought us all this way without a plan." "Plan was to get you safe, keep you fed. Everything else is details." "Details," Eliza repeated flatly. "I'm a widow with an infant and no money and no skills that translate to survival out here. Those aren't details. You survived 3 weeks in that town after your husband died. Survived an auction block. Survived 2 days hard riding with a baby. That's not nothing." Caleb's eyes met hers across the fire. "You're tougher than you think, Mrs. Whitmore." "Don't call me that. Call me Eliza." Something shifted in his expression. "Eliza, then. And you can stop calling me Mr. Mercer. It's just Caleb." The informality felt dangerous, like crossing another kind of bridge. But Eliza nodded. "All right. Caleb." That night, she dreamed of James, not the drunk, desperate man of his final months, but the younger version who'd courted her with wildflowers and promises. In the dream, he stood on the auction block instead of her, and she watched helplessly as strangers bid on his life, his future, his worth measured in gold coins and cold appraisal. She woke with tears on her face and Thomas crying against her chest. Across the dead fire, Caleb sat upright, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. He didn't turn when she stirred, didn't acknowledge her tears, just kept his vigil, a silent sentinel between them and whatever waited in the night. The third day's ride took them higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner, colder, sharp with pine and snow. They climbed through passes that made Eliza's head spin, followed trails that looked like they'd been carved by goats rather than men. And then, as the sun slanted toward afternoon, they crested a final ridge and Caleb pulled his horse to a stop. "There," he said simply. Below them lay a valley, high and green despite the altitude, sheltered by peaks on 3 sides. A creek cut silver through its center, feeding meadows of tall grass that rippled in the wind like water. And at the valley's southern end, Where the creek bent around a stand of aspens stood a cabin, small, rough-built, but solid. "Home," Caleb said, and for the first time since Eliza had met him, something like contentment crossed his face. They descended into the valley as the sun touched the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. The cabin resolved itself into more detail as they approached. Log construction, sturdy door, 2 windows with real glass, a barn and corral behind it. Smoke rose from the chimney, Eliza's breath caught. "Someone's there." "Cooper." Caleb's voice held warmth. "Hired hand. Stays on through winter to look after things when I'm gone." A man emerged from the cabin as they approached, old, weathered, with a limp and a face that looked like cracked leather. His eyes went wide when he saw Eliza and Thomas. "Boss." His voice was rough as gravel. "Didn't expect you back this soon, or with—" He trailed off, clearly unsure how to finish. "Cooper. This is Eliza Whitmore and her son Thomas. They'll be staying on." Caleb dismounted, then moved to help Eliza down from her horse. "Eliza, this is Cooper. Best hand in the territory, though he'll tell you different." Cooper's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. "Ma'am, little one." He looked at Caleb. "Staying on, you say?" "That's right." A long look passed between the two men, some communication Eliza couldn't decode. Then Cooper nodded slowly. "Best get you settled then." "Got a fire going, beans on. Not much, but it's warm." The cabin's interior was spare but clean. One large room with a stone fireplace, a rough table and chairs, a rope bed in one corner covered with thick furs and wool blankets. A ladder led up to a loft. The walls were chinked tight against drafts, and the floor was solid planking rather than packed earth. Eliza stood in the middle of the room, Thomas heavy in her arms, and tried to process that this was now her life. This cabin, this valley, this vast isolation broken only by 2 men and an infant. "You take the bed," Caleb said from behind her. "I'll sleep in the loft." "That's not negotiable." His tone was flat, final. "You need proper rest. So does Thomas. Loft's fine for me." Cooper brought in their things, then retreated to the barn with obvious tact. Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. 3 days of riding. 3 days of fear and uncertainty and forced trust. She wanted to cry or scream or laugh hysterically at the sheer impossibility of her situation. Instead, she looked up at Caleb, who stood near the door like he wasn't sure whether to stay or go. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For all of it." He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. Winter's coming. It's hard up here, harder than you're prepared for." "Then I'll learn." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or respect. "Yes," he said slowly, "I believe you will." That first night in the valley, Eliza barely slept. Every creak of timber settling, every gust of wind against the cabin walls, every distant call of a nightbird pulled her back from the edge of unconsciousness. Thomas, by contrast, slept deeply for the first time in weeks, his small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of true rest. She watched him in the firelight, counting his breaths, trying to believe they were really here, really safe. Morning came gray and cold. Eliza woke to find Caleb already gone, and the cabin empty except for Cooper, who stood at the stove frying salt pork. "Boss is out checking the herd," the old man said without turning. "Left before dawn. Coffee's hot if you want it." Eliza eased out of bed, careful not to wake Thomas. Her body ached in places she'd forgotten existed, muscles protesting 3 days of hard riding after weeks of near starvation. She poured coffee with shaking hands and stood near the fire's warmth. "How long have you worked for him?" she asked. Cooper's scarred hands never paused in their work. "Going on 7 years now. Came up here broken and half dead. Boss gave me work when no one else would." "Why wouldn't anyone else hire you?" "Took a bullet in the hip during the war. Left me with this limp. Most ranchers figure a man who can't sit a horse proper isn't worth feeding." He glanced at her, his eyes sharp despite their roomy appearance. "Boss figures different. Figures a man's worth is in his character, not his legs." Eliza sipped her coffee, processing this. "What was he like when you first came here?" "Quieter than he is now, if you can believe it. Worked dawn to dark like he was trying to outrun something. Still does most days, but he's steadier now. Valley's been good for him. He never married? Cooper's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. You asking if there's a Mrs. Mercer tucked away somewhere? Heat flooded Eliza's face. I just meant, I need to know what the situation is here. What's expected of me? Nothing's expected except you take care of yourself and the little one. Boss made that clear. Cooper plated the salt pork, added beans from a pot, set the food in front of her. Eat! Your skin and bones! Thomas woke as she was finishing the meal, his cries sharp and demanding. Eliza lifted him, felt the familiar tug as he latched onto Nurse. Across the cabin, Cooper busied himself with cleaning, giving her privacy without making it obvious. Caleb returned near midday, his coat dark with moisture from the mountain mist that had rolled in at dawn. He carried fresh meat, rabbit, Eliza thought, and moved immediately to the table to begin cleaning it. Herd looks good, he said to Cooper. Lost one calf to a cat, but the rest are strong. Should make it through winter if the snow holds off another few weeks. Creek's running high, Cooper observed. Could be early storms coming. Could be. Caleb's knife moved with practiced efficiency, separating hide from flesh. Need to get the north fence mended before they hit, and the barn roof's got a weak spot over the hay storage. They talked like this for several minutes, the easy shorthand of men who'd worked together long enough to communicate in fragments. Eliza listened, understanding perhaps half of what they discussed, feeling the weight of her ignorance settle over her like a physical thing. I could help, she said suddenly. Both men looked at her. With the fence mending, or whatever else needs doing. I'm not afraid of work. Caleb's expression was unreadable. You just rode 3 days with an infant. You need rest. I've been resting for weeks. It didn't help. She shifted Thomas to her other arm. I need to be useful. I can't just sit here while you both work yourselves to exhaustion. Can you sew? Cooper asked. Yes, I can mend clothes, patch blankets, sew canvas if needed. There's tack that needs repair, Caleb said slowly. Saddlebags with holes, reins that are cracking, winter gear that could use reinforcing before the cold sets in proper. Show me what needs doing, and I'll do it. Something shifted in Caleb's face, approval maybe, or respect. All right, but you work at your own pace. No pushing yourself past what's safe. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Caleb and Cooper rose before dawn, worked the ranch until dark. Eliza cared for Thomas, mended equipment, learned to cook over the cabin's fireplace instead of the wood stove she'd grown accustomed to in town. The work was endless but clean, honest labor with visible results. She watched Caleb when he didn't know she was looking, watched the way he moved through the world with careful economy, never wasting motion or words. Watched how gentle his hands were when he helped her carry water from the creek, how patient when teaching her to bank the fire properly for overnight burning. He kept his distance, always, maintaining a physical separation that felt both respectful and lonely. Thomas grew stronger daily, his cheeks filling out, his cries becoming more robust. He'd begun to smile, real smiles, not just gas, and the first time Caleb saw it, something in the man's carefully controlled expression cracked open just for a moment before smoothing over again. He looks like his father? Caleb asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Cooper already asleep in the loft. Eliza studied her son's face. A little. James had darker hair, lighter eyes, but the shape of the face, the way he furrows his brow when he's thinking, that's all James. You loved him. It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. I thought I did. When we married, I was 19 and he was charming, and I believed in fairy tales. By the time I realized what kind of man he really was, I was already pregnant. She kept her voice flat, factual. He wasn't cruel exactly, just weak in ways that hurt everyone around him. Caleb was quiet for a long time. The James I knew, he wasn't weak, reckless maybe, too quick to trust his luck. But when it mattered, he was solid. People change, or maybe they just reveal who they were all along. Eliza adjusted Thomas, who was drowsing against her shoulder. Why did you really come for me, Caleb? The truth this time. His gray eyes met hers across the firelight. I told you the truth. James saved my life once. I owed him. But he's dead. Debts die with the person. Not for me, they don't. Caleb's jaw tightened. I spent years doing things I'm not proud of, hurting people who maybe didn't deserve it. When James pulled me out of that canyon, I was running from who I'd been, trying to outrun it. He could have turned me in for the bounty on my head, and there was a bounty, make no mistake. But instead, he helped me disappear. Helped me become someone different. Eliza's breath caught. You were an outlaw. Was. Long time ago, different life. No apology in his voice. But that debt, that kindness when I didn't deserve it, that stays with me. So when I heard what happened to you and Thomas, I came. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. No, he agreed quietly. I suppose not. The first snow came 2 weeks after their arrival, just a dusting, melting by noon, but enough to remind them that winter was coming fast. Caleb and Cooper worked harder, longer hours. Eliza took over more of the cooking, learned to make bread that didn't taste like stones, figured out how to keep the cabin warm without burning through their wood supply too quickly. She also began exploring the valley when weather permitted. Thomas bundled against her chest in the sling Caleb had made. The land revealed itself slowly. Hidden meadows, game trails, a grove of aspens that turned golden in the afternoon light. She found wild herbs growing near the creek, sage and yarrow, and something she thought might be medicinal mint, started gathering and drying them for winter use. Cooper noticed first. Got an eye for useful plants, he commented one afternoon, watching her sort her findings. My late wife, she had that gift. Could walk through country and come back with enough to stock an apothecary. Your wife was a healer. Among other things, passed near 20 years ago now, cholera. His weathered face went distant. Boss doesn't know this, but that's why I came up here. Couldn't stand being in places that reminded me of her. Valleys far enough from everything that the memories don't hurt so sharp. Eliza understood that, the need for distance from pain. Do you ever regret it? Coming so far from civilization? Some days? When my hip aches and there's no doctor within 3 days' ride. When winter sets in and you go weeks without seeing another soul. He paused. But mostly no. Out here, you get to be who you are without everyone watching, judging. That's worth something. That night, Eliza asked Caleb about the valley's history. They sat at the table after supper, Cooper already retired to the loft, Thomas sleeping in the rope bed. Bought it 5 years ago from a prospector who'd given up looking for gold, Caleb said, his hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. He'd built the cabin, started the herd, but the isolation got to him. Went crazy, started seeing things that weren't there, sold out for almost nothing and headed back to civilization. Doesn't that worry you, that the isolation might do the same? I'm already half crazy, Eliza. Valley can't make me something I'm not. He said it lightly, but something in his eyes suggested truth beneath the humor. Besides, I'm not alone. Got Cooper, got the cattle, got... He trailed off. Got what? Nothing, just talking. But Eliza saw the way his gaze flickered toward where she sat, then away again, quick as lightning. Saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name and didn't want to examine. The weather turned properly cold in early November. Frost came hard and stayed, painting the windows with elaborate ice crystals, turning the creek's edges to glass. Caleb and Cooper brought the herd down from the high meadows, closer to the barn where they could be watched and fed through the coming months. Eliza stood at the cabin window one afternoon, watching Caleb work with a young bull that had gotten separated from the herd. The animal was scared, aggressive, lashing out with horns that could gut a man. But Caleb approached with infinite patience, voice low and steady, movement slow and non-threatening. It took an hour, but eventually the bull calmed, allowed itself to be led back to the others. He's got a gift with frightened things, Cooper said from behind her. Animals, people. Knows how to make them feel safe without making them feel trapped. Is that what he's doing with me? The question escaped before Eliza could stop it. Cooper's chuckle was dry as winter grass. That what you think? That you're a project to him? I don't know what I am. A debt repaid, a responsibility. I don't know. Why don't you ask him? Because asking meant acknowledging that it mattered. That somewhere in the past weeks, Caleb had become more than just her rescuer. He'd become the steady presence that made mornings bearable, the quiet voice in the evening that eased her nightmares, the man whose rare smiles felt like gifts. The storm hit 3 days later, a true mountain blizzard that descended with terrifying speed. Eliza had been outside hanging laundry when the wind shifted, when she looked up to see the sky gone white with approaching snow. She barely made it back to the cabin before the world disappeared. For 2 days, they were trapped inside. Snow piled against the door, the windows, buried the world in white silence. Caleb kept the fire burning, rationed their food carefully. Cooper told stories from his youth, tall tales about the war, about buffalo hunts, about rivers that ran backward and mountains that moved in the night. Thomas grew fussy in the close quarters, picking up on everyone's tension. Eliza walked him back and forth across the cabin's length, singing songs her mother had taught her, feeling the walls press in. On the second night, Caleb took Thomas from her arms. "Sleep," he said firmly. "I've got him." Too exhausted to argue, Eliza collapsed onto the bed. She woke hours later to find Caleb sitting by the fire, Thomas cradled in his arms, both of them asleep. The man's hard face had softened in sleep, vulnerability showing through the cracks in his armor. Her son's tiny hand rested against Caleb's chest, right over his heart. Something twisted in Eliza's chest, painful and sweet at once. This man who'd bought her freedom, who'd brought her to this remote valley, who kept his distance so carefully during the day. He held her son like he was precious, like he mattered. She rose quietly, moved to stand beside them. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before. The silver threading through Caleb's dark hair, the fine scars on his hands, the way his breathing had synchronized with Thomas's. A protector, a guardian, not just of her, but of her child. Caleb's eyes opened, instantly alert. "Eliza, you should be asleep. So should you." They looked at each other across the small space, Thomas sleeping between them. The fire crackled. Outside, wind howled against the cabin walls. Inside, warmth, safety. Something else that Eliza couldn't name. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of it, for giving us a chance." Caleb's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded flashing across his features before he locked it down. "You don't owe me thanks." "Yes, I do. You saved us, both of us. You saved yourselves. I just provided the means." He stood carefully, transferred Thomas back to her arms. Their hands brushed in the exchange, and Eliza felt the contact like electricity. "Storm should break by morning. We'll need to dig out." He retreated to the loft before she could respond, leaving Eliza standing by the fire with her sleeping son and a heart that had started beating in a new, unfamiliar rhythm. The storm did break, revealing a world transformed. Snow reached halfway up the cabin walls, buried the barn's door, turned the valley into an alien landscape of white and shadow. They spent 2 days digging out, creating paths between buildings, hauling feed to the cattle who stood in patient clusters waiting for humans to remember them. Eliza helped where she could, her hands growing raw from handling the shovel, her back aching from the unfamiliar labor. But she pushed through because sitting idle made her feel useless, made her remember the auction block and helplessness and everything she'd left behind. Cooper watched her with something like approval. "You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Whitmore." "Stop calling me Mrs. Whitmore. It's just Eliza." "All right then, Eliza. You're tougher than you look." That night, her hands cramped so badly she couldn't hold a spoon. Caleb noticed immediately, took the bowl from her shaking grip without comment. He returned minutes later with a tin of salve that smelled like pine and something medicinal. "Give me your hands." Eliza hesitated, then extended her raw, reddened palms. Caleb's touch was gentle as he worked the salve into her skin, his calloused fingers moving with practiced care. The intimacy of it made her breath catch. His bent head, the concentration on his face, the warmth of his hands on hers. "You don't have to prove anything," he said quietly, not looking up. "Not to me. Not to Cooper. Not to yourself. I have to be useful. Have to earn my place here. Your place is already earned. You're here because you belong here. Simple as that." His gray eyes lifted to meet hers. But if working makes you feel better, I won't stop you. Just don't destroy yourself doing it. Why do you care? The question came out sharper than intended. We're strangers, a debt to a dead man. Why does it matter to you if I hurt myself working too hard? Caleb's hand stilled on hers. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, because I've seen too many people break themselves trying to prove their worth, and because... He trailed off, jaw tightening. Because what? Because you matter, Eliza. You and Thomas both. You matter to me. He released her hands, stood abruptly. That scare you? Yes. No. Maybe. Eliza didn't know how to answer, didn't know how to process the sudden intensity in his voice, the way he was looking at her like she was something more than an obligation. I don't know what to do with that, she said finally, with mattering to someone. You don't have to do anything, just be here. Be safe. Let yourself heal. He moved toward the door. I'm going to check the barn. Lock up behind me. After he left, Eliza sat staring at her salve-covered hands, feeling the ghost of his touch on her skin. Cooper emerged from the loft, his knowing eyes taking in her expression. He's a good man, the old hand said. Saved, scarred, but good all the way through. I know. Do you? Because you look at him like you're waiting for him to turn into something else. Someone else. Eliza's throat tightened. Every man I've trusted has disappointed me. My father left. My husband drank himself to death and left me with nothing but debts. Why should Caleb be different? Maybe he won't be. Maybe he'll let you down, same as the others. Cooper's weathered face was thoughtful. But maybe treating him like he's already failed you isn't fair to either of you. The words haunted Eliza through the following days. She watched Caleb work, watched how he treated the animals with patience and the land with respect and her with careful distance. Watched how he played with Thomas when he thought no one was looking, making faces that earned baby laughter, talking to her son like he was a person worth listening to. Winter deepened. Days grew shorter, colder. They fell into new rhythms. Morning chores, afternoon maintenance, evenings by the fire, where Cooper told stories and Thomas learned to roll over, and Caleb carved small wooden animals with hands that could be so gentle when they chose. One night, Thomas refused to sleep. He cried and fussed, nothing Eliza did helping. She walked him, nursed him, sang to him. Nothing worked. Exhaustion pulled at her, making her clumsy, making her want to cry along with her son. Caleb appeared beside her. Let me try. She handed over the baby with relief and collapse. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Caleb walk the cabin's length, his deep voice rumbling in a wordless rhythm. Thomas's cries faded to whimpers, then silence. Within minutes, the baby was asleep against the man's shoulder. How did you do that? Eliza whispered. Reminded me of something my mother used to do. Before... He didn't finish the sentence. Before what? Before everything went wrong. Caleb settled into the chair near the fire, still holding Thomas. I had a brother, younger, used to cry all night. Ma would walk him just like this, humming. It always worked. Eliza heard what he didn't say, the past tense, the weight in his voice. What happened to them? Cholera took Ma when I was 12. My brother didn't make it either. Pa wasn't the same after. Started drinking, got mean. I left soon as I was old enough. I'm sorry. Long time ago. But his voice held old grief, old scars that had never properly healed. Point is, I remember what it was like, being small and scared and needing someone to make the world feel safe. That's what Thomas needs, what you're giving him every day. What we're giving him, Eliza corrected softly. Caleb's eyes met hers over Thomas's sleeping head. Yeah, he said quietly. What we're giving him. The moment stretched between them, fragile, weighted with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Cooper's snoring from the loft broke the spell, and Eliza laughed despite herself. He sounds like a wounded bear. Wait till you hear him in full winter. By February, the whole cabin shakes. They smiled at each other, and it felt like something shifting, some wall coming down brick by careful brick. December brought temperatures that froze solid anything left outside overnight. The cattle huddled in the barn shelter, their breath creating clouds of steam. Caleb and Cooper worked harder to keep them fed, to keep water sources from freezing completely, to maintain the structures that stood between survival and disaster. Eliza took over more of the indoor work, cooking, mending, maintaining the fire, caring for Thomas. She also started teaching herself to read the signs that Caleb and Cooper watched. Changes in the wind that meant incoming weather, the way the cattle behaved before storms, the subtle shifts in temperature that predicted hard freezes. One afternoon, she noticed the horses getting restless in their corral. The sky looked clear, but something felt wrong. She found Caleb in the barn. "Storm coming," she said. He looked up from the harness he was mending. "Sky's clear." "I know, but the horses are nervous, and the air feels different, heavier." Caleb stepped outside, studied the horizon with narrowed eyes. "You're right. Pressure's dropping. Snow by nightfall, probably heavy." He looked at her with something like respect. "Good eye." The storm hit just as predicted, another blizzard that locked them inside for 3 days. But this time Eliza felt less trapped, more prepared. She'd stocked extra firewood inside, prepared extra food, gathered Thomas's supplies in one accessible place. When the cabin walls closed in, she focused on the work at hand rather than the growing claustrophobia. On the second night, with wind screaming outside and snow piling higher, Cooper asked Eliza about her life before James. "Not much to tell," she said, rocking Thomas. "Grew up in a small town back east. My mother died when I was young. Father remarried, and my stepmother made it clear I wasn't welcome. Met James at a church social. He seemed like escape." "And was he?" Caleb's voice came from the shadows near the fire. "For a while. Then he became another kind of trap." Eliza kept her voice steady. "But I got Thomas from it, so I can't regret everything." "What would you have done?" Cooper asked. "If you could have chosen anything, any life at all?" No one had ever asked her that. Eliza considered the question, turning it over like a stone. "I think I would have wanted to matter, to do work that meant something, to be more than someone's wife or someone's burden." "You matter here," Caleb said quietly. "The work you do, keeping us fed, keeping the cabin warm, raising Thomas, that's not nothing. It's survival. That's different than meaning." "Is it?" His gray eyes reflected firelight. "Seems to me survival is the foundation everything else gets built on. Can't have meaning without it." Spoken like a man who's never had to question his worth based on whether he could birth sons or keep a house. The words came out harder than Eliza intended, but Caleb didn't flinch. "You're right. I've never had to prove my worth that way, but I've had to prove it in others. Had to earn the right to be seen as something other than what I was born to be." "An outlaw? A killer?" The word fell heavy into the silence. "That's what I was, what I'm still running from. So yeah, maybe I don't understand your particular struggle, but I understand fighting to be seen as something other than your worst moment." Eliza absorbed this, the casual admission of violence, the weight of old sins. "Does it work? The running?" "Sometimes. When I'm working so hard I can't think. When I'm focused on keeping cattle alive through winter or fixing fence or—" He paused. "When I'm reminded that maybe I can do something good, something that matters." "Like saving a widow and her child from an auction block?" "Like that." They looked at each other across the firelit cabin, and Eliza felt something shift in her chest, understanding, maybe, or recognition. They were both running, both trying to be something other than what circumstance had made them, both finding fragile purpose in this remote valley where the past couldn't reach quite as far. The storm broke on the third day, revealing a world buried under 4 feet of fresh snow. Digging out took 2 full days of brutal labor. Eliza worked alongside the men, her muscles screaming, her hands raw despite the salve. But she pushed through because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant confronting the growing realization that this place, this cabin, this valley, these 2 scarred men and her son, felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. And that terrified her more than any blizzard. Christmas came without ceremony. Eliza woke to find the cabin silent, except for the fire's crackle and Thomas's soft breathing. She'd lost track of dates in the monotony of winter survival, but Cooper had marked it on a calendar he kept scratched into the cabin wall with charcoal, 25 lines crossed through December. She rose quietly, not wanting to wake the others, and stood at the window watching dawn paint the snow-covered valley in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere beneath all that white lay the life they'd built. The garden plot she'd planned for spring, the paths they'd worn between buildings, the future she was starting to believe in despite every instinct screaming that good things never lasted. "Merry Christmas." Caleb's voice came soft from behind her. Eliza turned to find him descending from the loft, his hair loose around his shoulders, eyes still heavy with sleep. The intimacy of seeing him like this, unguarded, unprepared, made her breath catch. "I didn't know you celebrated," she said. "Don't, usually, but seemed like maybe you might want to." He moved to the stove, began building up the fire for cooking. "Cooper and we usually just treat it like any other day. But with Thomas here, he's too young to know the difference." "Yeah, but you're not." Caleb glanced at her, something uncertain in his expression. "I made something for the baby. Nothing fancy, but..." He retrieved a small bundle from his saddlebag, unwrapped cloth to reveal a carved wooden horse. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail perfect, from the flowing mane to the delicate hooves. It fit perfectly in Eliza's palm, smooth and warm. "Caleb, this is beautiful." "Worked on it at night, when everyone was asleep." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. "Figured every boy should have a horse, even if it's just a toy." Eliza's eyes burned. The thought of him carving this in secret, spending hours on something purely for Thomas's future joy, undid something in her chest. "Thank you. He'll treasure it. And this." Cooper emerged from the loft, limped over with something clutched in his gnarled hands. "Made it from scraps, but it'll keep the little one warm." A small quilt, pieced together from fabric remnants, old shirts, worn blankets, bits of canvas. Each square carefully stitched, the whole thing backed with soft rabbit fur. Practical and beautiful in equal measure. "Cooper, I don't..." "You didn't have to..." "Didn't have to. Wanted to." The old man's weathered face creased into something like a smile. "Boys brought life back to this place. That's worth celebrating." Eliza looked between them. These two hard men who'd carved out existence in this brutal landscape, who'd taken her and Thomas in without hesitation, who were now standing in the morning light offering gifts made with their own scarred hands. The weight of it pressed against her ribs, made breathing difficult. "I don't have anything for either of you," she whispered. Caleb's expression softened. "You being here is enough." They spent Christmas Day in the cabin while wind howled outside. Cooper told stories about Christmases during the war, bitter cold and homesickness, but also moments of unexpected grace when enemies stopped fighting long enough to remember their shared humanity. Caleb contributed little, but Eliza caught him watching Thomas with an expression that made her wonder what memories he was wrestling with. She cooked a special meal with the last of their stored vegetables and a portion of precious sugar Cooper had been hoarding. Not much, but better than their usual fare. They ate together at the rough table, and for a few hours the cabin felt less like a survival shelter and more like a home. That night, after Cooper had retired and Thomas was sleeping, Eliza and Caleb sat by the fire. The easy silence between them had become familiar, comfortable in a way she'd never experienced with James, who'd needed constant noise to drown out whatever demons chased him. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza said finally. "Always." "Why did you never marry? Build a family of your own?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Had a woman once. Before I came here. Before I decided to try being something other than what I was." "What happened?" "She was a rancher's daughter. Good family, good name. I was, well, you know what I was. Her father found out about my past, made it real clear that marrying me would mean losing everything, her inheritance, her family, her place in society." He stared into the fire. "Told her I'd understand if she chose them over me. And she did. She did. Can't blame her for it. Her father was right. I had nothing to offer except a reputation and a future that probably ended with a rope or a bullet." His jaw tightened. "So I came here. Figured if I couldn't have that life, I'd build something else, something clean." Do you regret it, not fighting for her? Every day. And not at all. He looked at Eliza. She made the smart choice. Safe choice. But it taught me something important. People will choose security over love almost every time. Can't fault them for it, but can't forget it either. Eliza thought about James, about the choices she'd made out of fear and desperation. What if love and security weren't separate things? What if they could be the same? Then I'd say that's rarer than gold and twice as valuable. Something shifted in his expression. Why are you asking, Eliza? Because I'm starting to feel things I have no right to feel. Because when you hold Thomas, something in my chest breaks open. Because this place, this life, this strange family we've cobbled together feels like the first real thing I've ever had. Just curious, she said instead. Caleb's eyes held hers, and she saw that he didn't believe her. But he didn't push, just nodded slowly and changed the subject to plans for spring planting. January brought cold so intense it hurt to breathe. They stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only to feed animals and haul water that froze within minutes of leaving its source. Eliza's world contracted to the cabin's four walls, the fire's warmth, the rhythm of Thomas's needs, and the men's careful presence. She began teaching Thomas to grasp objects, the wooden horse Caleb had made, spoons, bits of cloth. The baby's growing awareness delighted everyone. Cooper carved more toys. Caleb built a small pen where Thomas could safely practice rolling and eventually crawling. They were building a childhood for her son in this isolated valley, giving him something Eliza had never had, the certainty of being wanted. One particularly brutal night, the cabin's chimney began smoking badly, filling the room with acrid fumes. Caleb went up to clear it despite the dangerous cold and darkness. Eliza stood at the base of the ladder, heart in her throat, listening to him work on the roof while wind screamed and temperature dropped to levels that could kill in minutes. When he finally climbed back down, his face was white with cold, his hands nearly frozen. Eliza pulled him to the fire, rubbed warmth back into his fingers with desperate efficiency. "You could have died up there," she said, her voice shaking. "Chimney had to be cleared. We'd have suffocated otherwise. You could have waited until morning, until the storm passed. And risk the cabin filling with smoke while everyone slept?" He caught her hand, stilling their frantic movement. "Eliza, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're half frozen, and you could have fallen, and we wouldn't have even known until morning when we found your body in the snow." "But I didn't fall. I'm here." This time. She pulled her hands free, wrapped her arms around herself. "What about next time? What happens to us if you die doing something reckless?" "Us?" Caleb's voice went quiet. "That what we are now? An us?" Eliza's breath caught. She'd said it without thinking, revealed something she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. "I just meant Thomas and I depend on you, on both of you. If something happened, nothing's going to happen." "You can't promise that. Nobody can." Her voice broke. "James promised me security and left me with debts. My father promised he'd always take care of me and then chose his new wife over his daughter. Everyone promises, Caleb, and everyone breaks those promises eventually." He stood, moved close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I won't." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do, because I've spent my whole life breaking things, breaking people, breaking trust, breaking every good thing I ever touched, and I'm done with it." His gray eyes were intense in the firelight. "You and Thomas? You're the first thing I've tried to build instead of destroy, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe, both of you. That's not a promise I make lightly." Eliza looked up at him, this hard man with his scarred hands and violent past and unexpected gentleness. "Why us? Why do we matter so much to you?" "Because when I look at Thomas, I see a chance at something I thought I'd lost. A chance to be someone worth knowing. And when I look at you—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "When you look at me, what?" "I see someone strong enough to survive what should have broken them. Someone who keeps getting up no matter how many times the world knocks them down. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am." His hand lifted, almost touched her face, then dropped. "That scare you?" "Terrifies me." "Good. Means you're smart." He stepped back, putting safe distance between them again. Get some sleep, Eliza. Storm should break by morning. But Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness with Thomas warm against her side, listening to the wind and the men's breathing from the loft, feeling the way her heart had started beating in a new rhythm. When had Caleb stopped being her rescuer and become something more? When had this cabin stopped feeling like temporary shelter and started feeling like the only place she wanted to be? February brought a thaw, brief, treacherous, melting snow just enough to create hidden ice beneath fresh powder. Cooper slipped on the barn steps, came down hard on his bad hip. The sound of his cry brought both Caleb and Eliza running. They got him inside, laid him on the rope bed while Eliza examined the damage. The hip wasn't broken, but it was badly wrenched. Cooper's weathered face went gray with pain. "I'm done," he gasped. "Hip's finally given out for good." "You're not done." Caleb's voice was firm. "You're hurt. There's a difference." "Can't work like this. Can't pull my weight." "Then you rest until you can." Eliza moved to prepare a poultice from the herbs she'd gathered and dried. "Nobody's asking you to work through an injury." But Cooper's expression held defeat. "I've been living on borrowed time since that bullet took my hip. Should have died in the war. Should have died a dozen times since. This is just the world catching up." "Stop talking like you're dying." Eliza's hands moved with practiced efficiency, mixing herbs into a paste. "You wrenched your hip. It'll heal." Over the next days, she proved it. She applied poultices, wrapped the joint with careful compression, made Cooper rest when he tried to push himself too hard. Caleb took over the old hand's work without complaint, running himself ragged to cover both their shares. Eliza picked up what she could, learning to feed cattle and break ice on water troughs while Thomas watched from his pen. The work was brutal, unrelenting. Eliza fell into bed each night so exhausted she barely had energy to nurse Thomas before sleep claimed her. Her hands grew rough as bark, her back a constant ache. But the ranch kept running. One evening, Cooper watched her collapse into a chair with Thomas. "You're tougher than I gave you credit for." "I'm surviving. Not the same as being tough." "Isn't it?" His eyes were sharp despite his pain. "You could have stayed soft, could have let Caleb and me do everything while you kept to the cabin. But you didn't. That's not survival. That's strength. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." He shifted, wincing. "Can I ask you something? You planning to stay? After winter breaks and travel's possible again?" The question hit like a physical blow. Eliza hadn't let herself think that far ahead, hadn't confronted the reality that spring would mean choices. "I don't know." "You should think about it. About what you want." Cooper's weathered face was serious. "Because Caleb's getting attached. To Thomas, sure, but also to you. And if you're planning to leave once the snow melts, you should tell him now, before it gets harder." "I never asked him to get attached." "No, but you let him anyway. Let him hope." The old man's voice gentled. "I'm not saying you owe him anything. You don't. But he's a good man who's been alone a long time. Kindest thing you can do is be honest about your intentions." That night, Eliza lay awake wrestling with Cooper's words. What were her intentions? She had no money, no prospects beyond this valley. Leaving would mean returning to a world that had already proven it had no place for a widowed mother. But staying meant accepting that this was her life now, isolated, dependent, bound to men who could change their minds about her worth at any moment. Except Caleb hadn't changed. Through months of winter hardship, through storms and injuries and the grinding difficulty of survival, he'd remained steady, constant. The thought of leaving him, leaving both of them, created an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. The answer came to her slowly, like dawn breaking over the mountains. She didn't want to leave. Not the valley, not the cabin, not the strange family they'd cobbled together. For the first time since James died, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she mattered beyond what she could provide or produce. But wanting to stay and being wanted to stay were different things. Caleb had offered shelter, not permanence, a debt repaid, not a future built. She had no right to assume his feelings matched hers, no reason to believe he saw her as anything more than an obligation he'd chosen to honor. March brought the first hints of coming spring, longer days, subtle warming, snow that melted and didn't return overnight. The valley began revealing itself again, brown earth showing through white blanket, the creek running fuller as ice broke up and winter's accumulation fed its flow. Cooper's hip improved slowly. He graduated from bed to chair to short walks around the cabin. The defeat in his eyes faded, replaced by his usual dry humor and sharp observations. Eliza knew her nursing had helped, but she also suspected Cooper's recovery had more to do with being needed than with herb poultices. Caleb grew quieter as the weather changed, watching the melting snow with an expression Eliza couldn't read. She caught him staring at her sometimes, his gray eyes holding questions he never asked. The tension between them stretched taut, like a rope being slowly twisted tighter. One afternoon in late March, Eliza was outside hanging laundry when she heard horses. Her heart jumped. They'd seen no one but each other for 5 months. She turned to see 2 riders approaching across the valley floor, their horses picking careful paths through melting snow. Caleb emerged from the barn, rifle held casual but ready. Cooper limped out behind him. They waited as the riders approached, 2 men, both rough-looking, both armed. "Caleb Mercer." The first rider's voice carried across the remaining distance. "Heard you were up here." "You heard right. State your business." The riders pulled up 20 feet away. Up close, Eliza could see they were younger than she'd first thought, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of hardness that came from difficult living. "Name's Walker. This is my brother Tommy. We're looking for work. Heard you might need hands for spring roundup." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Where'd you hear that?" "From a man in town. Said you run cattle up here. Might be hiring come spring." "Who told you that?" "Don't remember his name. Old fellow. Worked the livery." Walker's eyes drifted to Eliza, lingered a bit too long. "Didn't mention you had a woman up here." "What I have or don't have isn't your concern." Caleb's voice went hard. "I'm not hiring. Move on." "Now wait just a minute." Walker held up one hand. "We rode 3 days to get here. Least you could do is hear us out." "I said I'm not hiring. That means this conversation is over." Tommy, the younger brother, spoke for the first time. "We just need work through spring. We're good with cattle, good with horses. We won't cause trouble." "Don't care how good you are. Don't need the help. Now turn those horses around before this gets unpleasant." Walker's face darkened. "That any way to treat fellow ranchers? You're not ranchers, and you're not welcome here." Caleb's rifle shifted fractionally. "Leave. Now." For a long moment, nobody moved. Eliza felt her pulse hammering, felt Cooper's tension beside her. Then Walker spat into the snow and yanked his horse's head around. "Your loss, Mercer. Could have used the help when the real work starts." They rode away slowly, deliberately, Walker looking back twice. Eliza didn't breathe properly until they'd crested the ridge and disappeared from view. "They'll be back," Cooper said quietly. "I know." Caleb's jaw was tight. "Eliza, inside, now." She wanted to argue, to demand explanations, but the expression on his face stopped her. She gathered Thomas and went into the cabin, her heart still racing. Caleb came in an hour later, his face grim. "Pack a bag, just essentials. Be ready to move fast if you need to." "What's happening?" Those weren't ranchers looking for work. Those were scouts. He checked his rifle, loaded his pistol with quick efficiency. "Probably bandits. They'll come back tonight or tomorrow with more men, try to take what we've got." Eliza's blood ran cold. "How many?" "Hard to say. Could be 3 or 4, could be 10. He met her eyes. "Either way, it's going to get ugly. I need you to take Thomas and hide in the root cellar if they come. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Understand?" "I'm not hiding while you fight." "Yes, you are. Because if they get past Cooper and me, you're the last line of defense for Thomas. And he needs you alive more than he needs you brave." The logic was sound, but everything in Eliza rebelled against it. There has to be another option. There isn't. We're 3 days from help, and they know it. They'll hit us when they think we're most vulnerable, probably dawn or dusk. Caleb's voice was flat, controlled. "This is what I meant when I said the valley was isolated. No law up here, just what we can hold ourselves." Cooper emerged from the barn with his own rifle. "Fortified what I could. Won't stop determined men, but it'll slow them down." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Caleb positioned supplies, checked ammunition, reinforced the cabin's door and windows. Eliza followed his instructions mechanically, her mind racing. This was the reality she'd been avoiding. The valley wasn't sanctuary, it was exposure. No civilization to appeal to, no help to summon, just 3 people against whatever came. Night fell with agonizing slowness. They ate cold food, kept the fire low, took turns on watch. Thomas picked up on the tension and fussed, making Eliza's nerves fray further. She walked him back and forth across the cabin, singing soft songs, trying to project calm she didn't feel. "Come here." Caleb's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. She moved to where he stood by the window, Thomas still in her arms. Caleb's hand came up to rest on her shoulder, steady, warm, grounding. "We're going to be all right," he said quietly. "I've survived worse odds than this." "When you were an outlaw." "When I was a lot of things." His gray eyes met hers. "Point is, I know how men like that think, know how they move, and I know how to stop them. By killing them. If necessary." No apology in his tone. "You want me to feel bad about protecting what's mine?" "What's yours?" His hand tightened fractionally on her shoulder. "This valley, this cabin, you and Thomas and Cooper, all of it, mine to protect." The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Instead, it settled something in Eliza's chest, the certainty that he meant it, that he would fight with everything he had to keep them safe. "I don't want you to die for us," she whispered. "Then I won't die. Simple as that." He squeezed her shoulder once, then released her. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you if anything happens." But sleep was impossible. Eliza lay in the darkness with Thomas, listening to every sound, every creak of timber and gust of wind. Her hand found the knife Mrs. Chen had given her all those months ago. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. Dawn came gray and cold. No attack materialized. The day passed with agonizing tension, every sound making them jump, every shadow a potential threat. By evening, Eliza's nerves were screaming. "Maybe they decided not to come back," she said as they ate another cold meal. "Maybe." But Caleb's expression said he didn't believe it. They came at dusk just as light was failing. 6 riders this time, Walker in the lead. They stopped at the edge of rifle range, clearly visible in the dying light. "Mercer!" Walker's voice carried across the snow. "We're giving you one chance. Hand over your supplies and the woman, and we'll leave peaceful." Caleb's response was to fire a warning shot that kicked up snow 3 feet in front of Walker's horse. "Next one goes through your chest," he shouted. "Leave now and you might make it off this mountain alive." Walker laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "6 of us, 3 of you. Math's not in your favor, friend. 3 of us who know this valley. 6 of you who'll freeze to death when I put bullets through your horses and you have to walk out." Another shot, closer this time. "Last warning." The riders retreated out of range, but they didn't leave. Eliza watched them make camp just beyond the ridge, their fire visible against the darkening sky. "They're waiting us out," Cooper said, "figuring we'll have to sleep eventually." "Then we don't sleep." Caleb's voice was grim. "We take turns, keep them in sight. They try to approach. We make them pay for every foot." The siege began. The first night crawled past with agonizing slowness. Caleb took the window facing the bandits' camp while Cooper watched the barn approach, and Eliza kept Thomas quiet in the corner farthest from any potential gunfire. Every hour felt like 10, measured in heartbeats and shallow breaths, and the weight of waiting for violence that didn't come. Dawn brought no relief. The bandits remained visible on the ridge, their fire smoking in the cold morning air. Eliza could see them moving around, passing what looked like a whiskey bottle, their laughter carrying faintly across the distance. They were making a show of their patience, demonstrating they had time to wait. "They'll try something tonight," Caleb said, his voice rough from exhaustion. "They won't wait much longer." "How do you know?" Eliza asked. "Because they're running out of supplies, same as we are. Difference is, we're in shelter and they're not. Another night in that cold and they'll be desperate." His gray eyes were bloodshot but sharp. "Desperate men make mistakes." Cooper shifted his weight, favoring his bad hip. "Could try picking them off from here. I can make that shot. And then the survivors scatter, circle around, come at us from 3 directions instead of 1. Caleb shook his head. "We hold position, make them come to us on our terms." Thomas chose that moment to wail, hungry, tired, sensing the tension that saturated the cabin's air. Eliza lifted him, tried to nurse him, but her milk had thinned from stress and fear. The baby latched on, then pulled away, frustrated, crying harder. "He needs proper food," she said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "He needs—" "I know." Caleb moved to his supplies, pulled out a small tin of condensed milk. "Mix this with warm water. It's not ideal, but it'll keep him fed." Eliza's hands shook as she prepared the makeshift bottle. Thomas took it greedily, his cries fading to hungry gulps. She watched him drink and felt something crack in her chest, the weight of keeping her child alive in circumstances that seemed designed to kill them both. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Caleb looked at her sharply. "For what?" "For being here. For making you a target. They want me because I'm—" "Stop." His voice cut like a knife. "They want you because they're animals who take whatever they can get their hands on. That's not your fault. That's theirs. But if I wasn't here, if you weren't here, I'd still fight them, because this is my land and nobody takes from me without paying for it." He crossed to where she sat, crouched down so they were eye level. "You listening? You and Thomas being here doesn't make this harder. Makes it clearer. Gives me something concrete to protect instead of just pride and property." Eliza met his eyes and saw truth there. Fierce, uncompromising truth that didn't allow for self-blame or doubt. "You really mean that?" Every word. The moment stretched between them, weighted with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Cooper cleared his throat from his position by the window. "They're moving, 2 riders heading this direction." Caleb was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Eliza pulled Thomas close and moved to the corner Caleb had designated as safest, the root cellar's entrance behind her, thick log walls on 2 sides. From there she watched Caleb position himself at the window, his body still and focused as a hunting cat. The riders came slowly, deliberately, staying just within rifle range. Walker and one of the others, both with their hands visible and empty. "Mercer," Walker called, "we want to talk." "Then talk from there," Caleb shouted back. "We're willing to negotiate. Let us approach peaceful and we can work something out." "You can work it out from exactly where you are." Walker's horse shifted, dancing sideways. "Be reasonable, man. We're freezing our asses off out here. Just want to talk terms." Caleb's finger moved to the trigger. "I gave you terms. Leave or die. Those are your only options." "What about the woman?" The other rider spoke for the first time. "She want to stay trapped in that cabin? Maybe she'd like a say in her own future." Eliza felt ice slide down her spine. They were trying to divide them, make her seem like a prisoner instead of someone being protected. "The lady's right here," Caleb's voice rang with contempt. "She can hear you, and she's got more sense than to trust men who ride up armed and demanding women like they're livestock. Ask her yourself then. Let her speak for herself." Caleb glanced back at Eliza, a question in his eyes. She shook her head firmly, no words needed. His expression shifted, something like relief crossing his features before he turned back to the window. "She says no," he shouted. "Now get off my land before I start dropping you where you stand." The riders retreated, but slowly, making it clear they weren't afraid. Eliza watched them return to their camp and felt her stomach twist. This was only beginning. They had time and numbers and desperation. What did she and Caleb and Cooper have except walls that could burn and ammunition that would eventually run out? "How long can we hold them?" she asked quietly. Caleb didn't look at her. "Long as we have to." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got." He finally turned, and the exhaustion in his face made him look 10 years older. "We've got food for maybe 3 more days if we ration. Ammunition for a prolonged fight if it comes to that. Water from the creek if we can reach it. We hold until they give up or until we make holding too expensive for them to continue. And if they don't give up, then we make it expensive." The second night was worse than the first. The bandits built up their fire, made noise, kept anyone in the cabin from sleeping properly. Eliza dozed in fits, jerking awake at every sound, her hand always on the knife at her belt. Thomas slept fitfully, picking up on her fear, whimpering in his sleep. Near midnight, Cooper shook Caleb awake, 3 of them moving, coming around from the east. Caleb was up instantly, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a man who'd woken to danger 1,000 times before. Eliza crept closer, staying low, trying to see what they were seeing. 3 shadows detached from the larger darkness, moving low and fast through the snow. They'd left their horses behind, were approaching on foot using terrain and darkness for cover. "They're going for the barn," Caleb said quietly, probably planning to set it on fire, drive us out into the open. Can't let them reach it, Cooper said. No, we can't. Caleb checked his rifle, his movements calm and methodical. When I give the word, light every lamp we've got. Make them think there's more of us than there are. And start shooting. Don't aim to hit, aim to scare. Make them think twice about getting closer. Eliza's heart hammered. What are you going to do? What I have to. He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. If this goes wrong, you take Thomas and run. Don't look back. Don't wait for us. Just run. Caleb, promise me. She wanted to refuse, to argue, to tell him she wouldn't abandon them, but the fierce urgency in his eyes stopped her. I promise. He nodded once, then slipped out the cabin's back door so quietly Eliza barely heard it close. She moved to the window beside Cooper, her pulse roaring in her ears. What's he doing? She whispered. What he's good at. Cooper's weathered face was grim. Being a hunter instead of the hunted. They watched the three shadows continue their approach, unaware they were now being stalked. Caleb had disappeared completely into the darkness. No movement, no sound, nothing to indicate he was there. The first bandit reached the barn's edge. Then Caleb's voice cut through the night, cold and clear. Drop your weapons, or I drop you. The bandit spun, searching for the voice's source. One raised his rifle, and Caleb's shot rang out, not hitting flesh, but punching through the man's gun, sending it flying from his hands with a scream of metal on metal. Next one goes through bone, Caleb shouted. Your choice. For a frozen moment, nobody moved. Then the three bandits broke and ran, scrambling back toward their camp in panicked disorder. Cooper started shooting from the window, not hitting, but getting close enough to keep them running. Eliza lit lamps as instructed, flooding the cabin with light that spilled through windows and made it impossible to count how many people were inside. Caleb appeared at the cabin door 5 minutes later, breathing hard, his rifle still smoking. They won't try that again tonight. But he was wrong. Near dawn, they tried something different. 2 riders charging straight at the cabin, firing wildly, clearly hoping to force a mistake through shock and aggression. Caleb and Cooper fired back, both men frighteningly accurate despite exhaustion. One rider's horse went down, spilling its rider into the snow. The man scrambled up, limping badly, and retreated with his companion providing covering fire. That's 2 hurt and 1 disarmed, Cooper said with grim satisfaction. Odds are getting better. But Eliza saw the cost in both men's faces, the deepening exhaustion, the tension that wound tighter with each hour. They couldn't sustain this much longer. Something had to break. It broke near noon on the 3rd day. Eliza was trying to get Thomas to eat when she heard horses, many horses, coming fast. Her blood turned to ice. Reinforcements. The bandits had called for help and now they were finished. But then she heard Caleb shout from the window, something like relief in his voice. Cooper, it's Morrison! Eliza rushed to look. A group of 8 riders was thundering into the valley, and at their head was a man with a sheriff's star glinting on his coat. The bandits' camp erupted into chaos, men scrambling for horses, scattering in 3 directions, abandoning their siege in panicked flight. The sheriff's men pursued 2 of them, but the leader, Morrison, rode straight for the cabin. Caleb met him at the door, gripping the man's hand with fierce gratitude. How did you know? Caleb asked. Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen hard things and survived them. Got a telegram 3 days ago. Anonymous. Said there might be trouble up here. Took us this long to organize a posse and make the ride. Who sent it? Don't know. Message was unsigned, but whoever it was saved your lives. Morrison's eyes took in Eliza, Thomas, Cooper's limp, the fortifications, the exhaustion carved into every face. You all right? We are now, Caleb said quietly. Morrison's men returned an hour later with 3 of the bandits in custody. The others had scattered into the mountains, would probably freeze before they found civilization. The sheriff took statements, examined the evidence, looked at the captured men with disgust. Recognize 2 of these, he said. Wanted for robbery down in Colorado. 3rd one I don't know, but I'm betting he's got paper on him somewhere. He turned to Caleb. You did right holding them off. Most men would have folded. Most men don't have as much to protect, Caleb said, his eyes finding Eliza. Morrison noticed the look, and something shifted in his expression. The woman and child. They yours? There was a weighted pause. Then Caleb said simply, Yes. Eliza's breath caught. Morrison nodded slowly, accepting the claim without question. Well then, makes sense you'd fight like you did. Man protects his family. His family. The words echoed in Eliza's mind long after Morrison and his men had left with their prisoners, long after the valley had gone quiet again, long after Caleb and Cooper had collapsed into exhausted sleep, and she stood at the window watching the sun set over mountains that had nearly witnessed their deaths. She looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in his pen, unaware how close he'd come to losing everything. Looked at Cooper, snoring softly from the loft, the old man who'd claimed them as worth protecting. Looked at Caleb, sprawled in the chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap even in sleep, his scarred hands still ready to defend what he'd called his family. The realization settled over Eliza like a physical weight. Somewhere in these months of survival and hardship and slowly built trust, she'd stopped being a debt repaid and become something else, someone who mattered, someone worth fighting for, someone who belonged. And more terrifying than any bandit siege, she'd started feeling the same way about him. The days after the siege felt strange, hollow. They'd been wound so tight for so long that relaxing felt dangerous, like lowering their guard would invite new disaster. Caleb maintained his watch schedule for nearly a week before Cooper finally told him to stop being an idiot and get some proper sleep. Eliza threw herself into work, cleaning the cabin top to bottom, mending everything that had been neglected during the siege, cooking proper meals again. Anything to avoid thinking about Caleb's words to Morrison, about the way something had shifted irrevocably between them. But avoidance only worked so long. 10 days after Morrison left, Eliza was hanging laundry when Caleb approached. He'd been working on repairing the barn's door, but now he stood with his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked. Eliza's heart jumped. About what? About what happens next. She set down the laundry, wiped her hands on her skirt. All right. They walked to the creek's edge, where water ran clear and cold over stones that were just beginning to show through melting snow. Spring was coming, really coming, and with it the end of the isolation that had cocooned them through winter. Morrison's visit reminded me that the valley's not as isolated as I like to think, Caleb said, staring at the water. People know I'm up here. Know there's a woman and child with me. That's going to bring questions, assumptions. What kind of assumptions? About who you are, what you are to me. He turned to face her. I told Morrison you and Thomas were mine. I shouldn't have done that without asking you first. Shouldn't have claimed you like property. Is that what you think you did? Claimed me. Didn't I? His gray eyes were troubled. You came here because you had no choice. Because I brought you. You've stayed because winter made leaving impossible. But now spring's coming, and soon the passes will be clear, and you'll have options again. Eliza's chest tightened. You're saying I should leave? No, I'm saying you could leave. There's a difference. Caleb's hands clenched on his hat brim. When I told Morrison you were mine, I meant it. But what I mean doesn't matter if you don't mean it back. If staying here feels like being trapped, then you should go. I'll give you money, supplies, help you get wherever you want to be. And if I don't want to go? The question hung between them. Caleb's expression shifted, hope and fear warring in equal measure. Then I need to know what you're staying for. Out of gratitude? Obligation? Fear of the alternative? None of those things. Eliza's voice came stronger than she felt. I'm staying because this place feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. Because Cooper treats me like family and Thomas like a grandson. Because you, she faltered, then pushed through. Because when those bandits demanded I speak for myself, the only words in my head were that I was already exactly where I chose to be. Caleb's breath left him in a rush. Eliza, I'm not finished. She stepped closer, close enough to see the rapid pulse at his throat. I'm staying because when you hold my son, something in my chest breaks open. Because your hands are scarred from protecting us. Because you've never once treated me like I owed you anything, even though you bought my freedom with your own gold. Because you're the first man who's ever made me feel safe and seen and valued all at once. You feel safe with me? His voice was rough, disbelieving. I'm a killer, Eliza. I've got blood on my hands that no amount of honest ranching will ever wash clean. I know what you were. I also know what you are. She reached up, touched his face. The first time she'd initiated contact, the first time she'd admitted through action what she'd been feeling for months. You're the man who carved my son a horse, who taught me to read weather signs, who fought 6 armed men to keep us safe. That's who you are to me. Caleb's hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm against his scarred cheek. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you. Maybe not, but I'm choosing it anyway. She took a breath, steadied herself. I'm choosing you, Caleb, if you'll have me. If this isn't just about debt or obligation or... He kissed her, cut off her words with his mouth, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. The kiss was nothing like what Eliza had known with James. No drunken fumbling, no selfish taking. This was reverent, claiming, a question and answer all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since Christmas. Since before Christmas. Since the moment you stepped down from that auction block and looked at me like I might be different than everyone else who'd failed you. You are different. I'm trying to be. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. This valley, this life, it's hard, isolated. There's no society, no neighbors, no easy path, just work and weather and hoping we survive another winter. I know. And me, you're choosing me, a man who'll never be fully civilized, who'll always have darkness in him, who might wake up from nightmares and not remember where he is or who he's become. I know that too. Eliza's hands gripped his shirt. I'm not asking for perfect, Caleb. I'm asking for real, for a partnership built on choice instead of circumstance, for someone who sees me as more than what I can provide or produce. You're everything. The words came out fierce, final. Your strength and grace, and you've survived things that should have broken you. And yeah, you're choosing this life, but I'm choosing too. Choosing to try being the man you see when you look at me. Choosing to build something with you instead of just surviving alone. Then we're agreed. She smiled, felt it trembling at the edges. We're choosing each other. Yeah. His arms came around her, pulled her close. We are. They stood like that for a long time, the creek running beside them, spring sun warming their shoulders, Thomas's distant babbling carrying from the cabin where Cooper was watching him, building a future out of choice instead of desperation, out of trust slowly earned instead of promises quickly broken. When they finally walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Cooper took one look at their faces and smiled. About damn time, was all he said. That night, after Thomas was asleep and Cooper had retreated to the loft, Caleb pulled Eliza close on the rope bed that had been hers alone for months. They didn't make love. Both too aware of Cooper overhead, of Thomas nearby, of the need to take things slow and deliberate. But they lay together in the firelight, Caleb's arms around her, his breath warm against her hair. I never thought I'd have this, he said quietly. Thought I'd burn that possibility when I chose the life I did. People change, get second chances. You believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of trying to be better than we were? She shifted to look up at him. You gave me a second chance when you paid my debts. Let me give you one by choosing to stay. His arms tightened around her. I love you. Should probably say that proper. I love you, Eliza. You and Thomas both. The words settled into her chest, warm and real and terrifying in their permanence. I love you too. Took me a while to admit it, but it's true. How long? Since you climbed onto the roof in a blizzard to fix the chimney. Since you held my son while I slept. Since you looked at me like I was worth fighting for. She paused. Maybe since that first night in Mrs. Chen's boarding house, when you gave me the bed and slept in a chair by the fire. When you could have demanded anything and instead demanded nothing. Caleb's laugh was quiet, wondering. We're quite a pair, broken people trying to build something whole. Maybe that's exactly what it takes. Understanding how things break so we can build them stronger. They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, building a future one honest word at a time. Outside, the valley prepared for spring. Inside, two people who'd survived the worst life could throw at them chose to believe in something better. Morning came soft and clear. Eliza woke to find Caleb already gone, but Cooper was cooking breakfast and actually humming, which she'd never heard before. "He's happy," the old man said when he caught her watching. "Haven't seen him like this in all the years I've known him." "Are you all right with it? With me staying permanently?" Cooper's weathered face creased into a genuine smile. "Been hoping for it since Christmas. Boy needs a mother, Caleb needs a partner, and I need to know this place will continue after I'm gone." "You're not going anywhere." "Not today, but eventually." He served her coffee, his movements stiff but steady. "When that day comes, I want to know the valley's in good hands. Yours and Caleb's and Thomas's, that's worth more than gold." Eliza's eyes burned. This gruff old man who'd shown her nothing but respect, who'd helped her survive winter, who'd taught her to be stronger than she knew, he'd become family too. "Thank you, Cooper, for everything." "Don't thank me. Just keep making Caleb smile like that. Keep being the reason he wants to be better." Cooper's eyes were sharp despite their kindness. "That's all the thanks I need." Caleb returned at midday with news that would change everything. He carried a letter, the envelope weathered from travel, but the seal unbroken. Eliza watched him turn it over in his hands, his expression unreadable. "Came with Morrison's posse," he said finally. "One of his deputies was carrying mail for the valley. This was in it." "Who's it from?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't know. No return address. Just says Caleb Mercer, High Valley, Montana Territory." He looked at her, something vulnerable in his eyes. "You want to be here when I open it? Or should I want to be here." Eliza moved to stand beside him, their shoulders touching. "Whatever it says, we face it together." He broke the seal with careful fingers, unfolded paper that crackled with age. His eyes scanned the contents, and Eliza watched his expression shift from wariness to shock, to something she couldn't name. "What is it?" she asked softly. "It's from the woman I told you about, the rancher's daughter." His voice was rough. "She's dying, consumption. Says she wanted to write before it was too late, to tell me she was sorry, that choosing her father over me was the biggest mistake of her life." Eliza's chest tightened. "Caleb." "She says she married a banker, had a good life by society's standards, but she never forgot me. Never stopped wondering what would have happened if she'd been braver." He lowered the letter, and Eliza saw his hands were shaking. "She's asking for forgiveness. Saying she hopes I found happiness even if she didn't." The silence stretched heavy between them. Eliza understood what this letter represented, the ghost of a future that might have been, a woman who'd chosen security over love and lived to regret it. Part of her wanted to be jealous, territorial. But looking at Caleb's face, she saw only old grief and older scars. "Do you forgive her?" Eliza asked. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to the fireplace, held the letter over the flames. "Yeah, I do, because holding on to anger about choices made years ago is like drinking poison and expecting it to hurt someone else." He dropped the letter, watched it catch and curl, and turned to ash. "She made her choice. I made mine. And my choice brought me here. To you. To Thomas. To a life I never thought I'd deserve." He turned to face Eliza fully, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "I don't regret what happened back then. Not anymore. Because if she'd chosen me, I wouldn't have come to this valley, wouldn't have been there when you needed someone, wouldn't have this chance at something real." Eliza crossed to him, took his scarred hands in hers. "You're sure?" "Never been more sure of anything." He pulled her close, rested his chin on top of her head. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things we never knew to hope for." They stood like that while the letter turned to ash, while the past burned away and left only the present. Outside, spring continued its slow arrival, and with it came the knowledge that their time of isolation was ending. Soon the passes would clear. Caleb would need to make a trip to town for supplies, to file proper claim on the land, to handle the business of ranching that couldn't be delayed forever. "I should go with you," Eliza said that night as they discussed the coming trip. When you go to town, people need to see us together, understand the situation. Caleb's expression grew troubled. It's 3 days hard riding each way, with Thomas that young. Cooper can watch Thomas for a week. He's done it before when I helped you with the herd. She saw his hesitation and pressed forward. People are already making assumptions, Caleb. Better they see us together, see that this is a choice I'm making freely. You worried about what they'll say? I'm worried about protecting what we've built, about making it clear I'm not some victim you're keeping against my will. Liza's voice was firm. Let them see us together. Let them draw their own conclusions. Cooper, listening from his chair by the fire, spoke up. She's right. Folks in town got long memories and short patience for things that don't fit their expectations. Better to show them outright than let rumors fester. So it was decided. 2 weeks later, when the passes had cleared enough for safe travel, Caleb and Eliza rode out together, leaving Thomas in Cooper's capable, if nervous, hands. The old man had held babies before, his own children, grandchildren lost to time and distance. But his anxiety about caring for Thomas alone was almost comical. He cries. I feed him. He's wet. I change him. Anything else goes wrong, I ride for help, Cooper recited for the 3rd time. He'll be fine. You'll be fine. Eliza kissed Thomas's forehead, trying not to let her own anxiety show. This would be the longest she'd been separated from her son since his birth. We'll be back in a week at most. The ride to town took 4 days instead of 3. Spring runoff had swollen creeks and turned trails to mud. They camped each night under stars that seemed impossibly bright after months of being confined to the cabin. Caleb built fires, caught fresh game, showed Eliza constellations, and told her their stories. It felt like a different kind of courtship, this slow journey through awakening land. On the 3rd night, with the fire burning low and coyotes singing in the distance, Caleb finally asked the question Eliza had been waiting for. Will you marry me? Simple, direct, no flowery speeches or elaborate proposals. Just a question asked in firelight by a man who'd learned that pretty words meant nothing compared to genuine intention. Yes, Eliza said, equally simple. Yes, I'll marry you. Don't you want to know what kind of life you're signing up for? What being married to me means? I already know. It means hard work and isolation and winters that try to kill us. It means being partner to a man who's still learning how to let himself be loved. It means raising my son in a valley that's beautiful and brutal in equal measure. She moved closer, took his hand. It means choosing every day to build something together instead of just surviving alone. I know exactly what I'm signing up for, Caleb, and I want it. His arms came around her, pulled her against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering. I'll try to be worthy of that choice. You already are. They reached town on the 4th day, and Eliza felt the weight of curious stares from the moment they rode down the main street. She sat straight in her saddle, refusing to look ashamed or cowed. Beside her, Caleb rode with quiet confidence, his hand occasionally reaching to brush against hers, small gestures of connection that spoke louder than words. Mrs. Chen appeared on her boarding house porch as they approached, and her weathered face broke into a genuine smile. Well now, look what spring brought back to us. Ma'am, Caleb dismounted, helped Eliza down with careful hands. Need rooms for a few nights, and I'm hoping you might help us with something. What kind of something? The legal kind. We're looking to marry properly. Need a witness and someone who knows how to file the paperwork. Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes moved between them, seeing everything they weren't saying. About time. I'll stand witness myself, and Judge Harrington's in town for spring circuit. He can make it official. Word spread through town like wildfire. The mountain man and his widow were getting married. Some folks smiled, some whispered, some looked scandalized. Eliza felt their judgment like physical weight but refused to buckle under it. She walked through town with her head high, bought supplies with Caleb at her side, let everyone see that she was exactly where she chose to be. The banker who'd tried to auction her off approached them outside the general store, his jowls quivering with indignation. Mrs. Whitmore, I heard you were living up in the high country. Didn't seem proper, an unmarried woman. Soon to be Mrs. Mercer, Eliza interrupted coolly, and my living arrangements are none of your concern. Your husband's debts were paid in full by this man. She gestured to Caleb, who had more honor in his little finger than James had in his whole body. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to conduct. She swept past him with Caleb following, and once they were out of earshot, he laughed quietly. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Too late for that. You're stuck with me now. They married 2 days later in Mrs. Chen's parlor, with the proprietor and Judge Harrington as witnesses. Eliza wore one of the dresses Mrs. Chen had given her that first night, mended and cleaned until it looked almost new. Caleb wore his only good shirt, his hair tied back, his scarred hand steady as he slid a simple gold band onto Eliza's finger. I don't have fancy words, he said when the judge asked if he had vows. But I promise to protect you and Thomas with everything I have. To work beside you, not above you. To choose you every day for the rest of my life. That's all I can offer, but I offer it freely. Eliza's voice was thick with emotion. I promise to build a life with you, not just survive one. To see you for who you are, not who you were. To choose you even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And to love you for as long as we both draw breath. The judge pronounced them married, and Caleb kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, muttering about dust, while Judge Harrington signed the marriage certificate with a flourish. You're legal now, he said, handing Caleb the document. In the eyes of the law and in the eyes of the community, that boy of yours, he'll carry the Mercer name if you choose to claim him. I do choose, Caleb said firmly. Thomas is my son, has been since the day I brought him and his mother home. They filed the paperwork that afternoon, making it official in every way that mattered. Thomas Whitmore became Thomas Mercer. Eliza Whitmore became Eliza Mercer. And the family they'd built in secret, in isolation, became a family the world could see. That night, in the privacy of Mrs. Chen's best room, Caleb and Eliza came together as husband and wife. It was nothing like Eliza's wedding night with James. No drunken fumbling, no selfish taking, no sense of duty or obligation. This was mutual choice, mutual desire, mutual recognition of the profound trust they'd built over months of hardship. Caleb touched her like she was sacred, mapping her body with scarred hands that had learned gentleness just for her. Eliza traced the marks of his past, bullet scars, knife wounds, the evidence of a life lived hard, and loved him not despite them, but because they'd made him who he was. Strong, steady, hers. After, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Caleb's voice came soft against her hair. Never thought I'd have this. A real marriage. A real family. You have it now. Because you chose it. Chose me. His arms tightened around her. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that choice. You already are, Eliza whispered. You already are. They left town 3 days later, their pack horses loaded with supplies, and their marriage certificate safely tucked in Caleb's saddlebag. The journey home felt different, lighter somehow, despite the heavy loads. They were returning not as two separate people bound by circumstance, but as a family built on choice and tested by survival. Cooper met them at the valley's entrance, Thomas strapped to his chest in the sling, the baby's delighted coos carrying across the meadow. The old man's weathered face creased into a smile when he saw their joined hands. About damn time you made it official, was all he said, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. Thomas had grown in their absence. Not much, but enough that Eliza noticed immediately. He'd learned to laugh properly, a belly-deep sound that made everyone smile. He'd also developed a fierce attachment to Cooper, reaching for the old man with chubby hands whenever he was near. Spoiled him rotten, Cooper admitted without apology. Boy deserves spoiling. That night, with Thomas asleep and Cooper retired to the loft, Caleb and Eliza sat by the fire in their cabin, truly their cabin now, legally and morally and in every way that mattered. We should add a room, Caleb said, studying the cabin's interior with a builder's eye. For Thomas, as he gets older, maybe 2 rooms. One for him, one for... He trailed off. For what? For any brothers or sisters he might have. Eventually, if you want. He looked at her, uncertain. Do you want more children? Eliza thought about it seriously, imagining the cabin filled with the sound of children's laughter, the valley alive with the next generation. Yes, I want Thomas to have siblings. Want to fill this place with family. Then we'll build the rooms, this summer, when the weather holds. His hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. Build a future that's big enough for all of us. Spring gave way to summer, and the valley transformed. Meadows burst into bloom, the creek ran full and clear, and the cattle grew fat on new grass. Caleb and Cooper worked from dawn until dark, expanding the herd, mending winter damage, building the new rooms that would house a growing family. Eliza planted a garden, vegetables and herbs, flowers for beauty and bees. She learned to preserve food for winter, to recognize medicinal plants, to read the subtle signs that meant weather changes or animal movement. The valley became hers, in a way that town had never been, that her father's house had never been, that even her marriage to James had never achieved. Thomas learned to sit up, then to crawl, then to pull himself upright on furniture with determined concentration. He said his first word on a morning in late July, not Mama or Dada, but Coop, reaching for the old man who'd become his constant companion and devoted guardian. Cooper's face when he heard it was something Eliza would treasure forever, joy and wonder and fierce protective love all mixed together. The old man scooped Thomas up, his bad hip momentarily forgotten, and danced the baby around the cabin while Caleb laughed and Eliza wiped away happy tears. By August, the new rooms were finished, rough but solid, with real glass windows and doors that closed properly. One would be Thomas's eventually, the other waiting for whatever children might come. The cabin felt less like a survival shelter and more like a home, every corner marked by their shared labor and growing love. Eliza discovered she was pregnant in early September. The nausea came first, then the bone-deep exhaustion that pulled her under despite all her efforts to work through it. She tried to hide it, not wanting to worry Caleb or Cooper, but both men noticed immediately. "You're carrying," Cooper said one morning, watching her struggle to keep down breakfast. It wasn't a question. Eliza met his knowing eyes and nodded. "Think so. Too early to be certain, but does Caleb know?" "Not yet. Wanted to be sure before I told him." "Tell him soon. Man's gonna notice when you start showing, and he'll be hurt if you kept it secret." Cooper's weathered face was gentle. "He'll be over the moon, you know. Another child to raise, to teach, to build a future for." That night, Eliza told Caleb. They were alone in their room, the main cabin now divided into private and shared spaces, and she took his scarred hand and pressed it against her still flat belly. "There's someone new coming," she said softly. "In the spring, if my calculations are right." Caleb's eyes went wide, disbelieving. "You're pregnant?" "Yes." His arms came around her gentle and fierce at once. "A baby. Our baby." His voice cracked. "I'm going to be a father, a real father, not just, you're already Thomas's real father. This doesn't change that." "I know, but this is..." He pulled back to look at her and tears tracked down his scarred face. "This is proof that something good can come from broken people, that we can build something that lasts." "We already did," Eliza said, touching his face. "This new baby is just more proof of what we already knew, that we were meant to build this life together." Winter came again, but this time it felt different. They were prepared, food stored, wood stacked, animals sheltered. More than that, they were a family now, bound by law and love and the growing life Eliza carried. The isolation didn't feel suffocating, but peaceful, a gift of uninterrupted time to simply be together. Thomas took his first steps in December, lurching from Cooper's arms to Caleb's with determined concentration. When he made it across the gap, the cabin erupted in celebration. 3 adults cheering for one small boy who'd just accomplished something enormous. Eliza watched them, Caleb swinging Thomas in the air, Cooper laughing with pure joy, and felt her heart swell past the point of containment. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and hard-won and worth every sacrifice it had taken to achieve. Her pregnancy progressed through winter without complication. By February, she was showing, obviously, her belly rounding beneath layers of wool and fur. Caleb watched her constantly, worry evident in his eyes, but Eliza felt strong, felt ready for whatever came next. The baby came in early April, arriving with the spring thaw. Eliza's labor was hard, but mercifully quick, Cooper playing midwife with surprising competence while Caleb paced the cabin and Thomas slept through the whole ordeal. When the baby finally arrived, a girl, small but fierce, with a lusty cry that announced her presence to the world, Caleb held her with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Eliza, she's perfect." "What should we name her?" Eliza asked, exhausted but jubilant. Caleb looked at the baby, then at Cooper, then back to Eliza. "Hope. Her name is Hope." Because that's what she represented. Hope for a future they'd built from nothing. Hope that broken people could create something whole. Hope that love chosen freely was stronger than any love demanded or expected. Hope Mercer became the Valley's newest resident, loved fiercely by her parents, her brother, and the old man who claimed grandfather status with zero hesitation. She thrived in the high country air, growing strong and healthy despite the isolation. Summer came again, and with it a surprise visitor. Sheriff Morrison rode into the valley one June afternoon, his expression serious. "Got news," he said, accepting coffee and a chair by the fire. "Those bandits we arrested? 2 of them confessed to other crimes. Turns out there was the bounty on Walker, enough to split 3 ways between you, Cooper, and the man who sent that anonymous telegram warning me about the siege." Caleb's expression was carefully neutral. "Any idea who sent that telegram?" Morrison smiled. "You're holding the receipt right now, sent from town 3 days before the siege started. Signed with your name." Understanding dawned. Caleb had sent for help before the bandits ever arrived, recognizing the danger and taking steps to protect his family. The anonymous part had just been his way of avoiding attention. "Smart man," Morrison continued. "That bounty money is yours by rights. Should be enough to expand your operation if you're interested. Maybe hire another hand or 2, buy breeding stock, whatever you need." The money changed everything and nothing. It gave them security, yes, but the real wealth was what they'd already built. A family forged in hardship, a love tested by survival, a future limited only by what they could imagine. By the time Hope was 6 months old, the valley had 2 additional ranch hands, young men looking for honest work and willing to respect the unusual family they'd be working for. The herd had doubled. Plans were being drawn for a proper barn, a larger house, maybe even a schoolhouse for when the children were old enough. Cooper's hip finally gave out completely in August, forcing him into permanent retirement from physical labor. But instead of becoming a burden, he became the valley's grandfather, watching children, telling stories, passing on the wisdom of a life lived hard and survived. He carved toys for Thomas and Hope, taught them songs, loved them with the fierce devotion of a man who'd thought his days of family were long past. On a warm September evening, the whole family gathered outside to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Thomas, now 2 years old, chased butterflies through the tall grass. Hope slept peacefully in Caleb's arms. Cooper sat in his chair, whittling another toy. And Eliza stood beside her husband, one hand on the swell of her belly, where their 3rd child grew. "You happy?" Caleb asked quietly. Eliza looked at the scene before her, the valley that had become home, the children they were raising, the old man who'd become family, the future stretching bright and possible before them. She thought about the woman she'd been on that auction block, desperate and alone and certain her life was over. Thought about the journey that had brought her here, the choices made and survived, the love discovered in the last place she'd expected to find it. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm happy." Caleb's arm came around her shoulders, pulled her close. "Me too. Never thought I'd be able to say that and mean it, but I do. This life, this family, you, it's everything I never knew to hope for." Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best futures. "Yeah." He kissed the top of her head. "They do." The sun sank lower, painting the world in gold. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. Closer, Thomas's laughter rang out as he caught a butterfly. Hope stirred and settled again, content. Cooper began humming an old song about mountains and home. And in that moment, in that valley carved from wilderness and isolation, a family that had been forged from desperation and debt found something rarer than gold. The simple, profound joy of being exactly where they belonged, with exactly who they'd chosen, building a future defined not by what they'd survived, but by what they'd created. The mountain man and his widow had found their way home. Not to a place on a map, but to each other. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years would pass. Children would grow. Hardships would come and be survived. But the foundation they'd built, the partnership forged in winter's grip, the trust earned through shared survival, the love chosen freely every single day, that would endure. Stronger than any storm, deeper than any doubt, more permanent than the mountains themselves. Because this was the truth they'd learned in the High Valley. Love that survives winter is love that can survive anything. And theirs had survived the coldest season of all, the winter of the heart, when hope seems impossible and trust feels foolish and choosing to believe in another person feels like the most dangerous gamble of all. They'd gambled and won, and in winning, they'd built something beautiful, a home, a family, a future, together.